What's up, Lebanon High School? I'm Asia,
And I'm Lou.
and welcome to a very special edition of Blue Devil News today, commemorating the 17th anniversary of 9/11.
Because of this, we have interviewed several LHS faculty and staff members to hear their story of 9/11.
Good morning, Blue Devils. We have a special segment today, specifically for today, because it is September 11th. On September 11th in 2001, a significant event happened that changed history for our country, and every one of your teachers knows where they were when that happened, and how it has impacted their lives, and it's impacted your life, and you were not around to see it happen in real time and to watch how it affected people around you, but it still does, and we are going to pay tribute to that and pay respect to that. And I want you to pay special attention to the details of what happened that day, but also to your teachers and your administrators and police officers who work in this school as they tell you how it impacted their lives.
It was December 7th, 1941, actually the next day that FDR said this day that shall live in infamy. We are living through another day of infamy for this country.
So I have two interesting events with 9/11 and how it affected me and my family. First, being a freshman in college, I was sitting in biology, and back then we weren't allowed to have our cell phones in class at all. And not everybody had a cell phone. But people's cell phones started going off like crazy. And I was sitting in there, and we were talking about frogs and whether they went from like tadpoles. And I couldn't tell you much of the lesson past that. I just remember frogs. But a girl just shouted out in class, "We've been hit. We've been bombed." And I left there and went to my brother's dorm, who is 2 years older than me. And I sat there with him, holding his hand, and watched the tower fall.
The chief of the department yelled, "The tower has come down. The tower has come down."
It was probably the hardest thing I've ever seen, is to know that devastation that happened. And I had been standing in between those two buildings 4 months ahead before that. And I knew the catastrophic event that had just happened on our soil. The second event that is the hardest for me is I remember being with my brother when he was called into active duty, all because those towers fell. It was the hardest moment I have ever been through, as he, had to go to war. My big brother had to fight for our country. And that was the hardest thing that myself or my family has ever been through. When those towers fell, I was by his side, and then I was by his side when he was called to active duty. And that is why today is so hard for a lot of us.
I was still homeschooled when September 11th happened. I was in elementary school, and I remember I had begged my mom to let me go outside for 30 minutes before I started my schoolwork. It was such a beautiful day. My mom, I was probably annoying enough that she gave in and let me go outside. And I remember coming back in, and I was trying to tell my mom something, but she wasn't answering. And I walked into our living room, and she was just standing in front of the TV and she wasn't responding to anything. And I looked at the TV, and I remember seeing the second tower fall, and she put her hand over her mouth and one hand over her stomach. She had just found out she was pregnant with my 16-year-old brother, or my brother who's now 16, and she just sat on the coffee table in the living room and didn't speak for 15 minutes.
So on September 11th, I was living in New York. I'm originally from New York, so I was still living there. I worked in a local college in their admissions office, and many of our students, I say majority of our students, were from New York City. And I just remember that day of being a panic, the kids wanting to get back down to the city. We were a couple hours outside of the city, wanting to see their family, find family members, and trying to remain calm myself, being nervous and worried. Talking with the students, and phone lines down in the city were out, so we couldn't reach anyone, their loved ones. And I just remember being worried for the students, their families.
I'm Selena Tinsley, and on 9/11, it was a very unique day. I was teaching at MAP Academy. I was a teacher there, and I had just left my principal's office from doing a post-conference about him coming to observe me. So I was a little nervous about that, but leaving, we had televisions in every classroom, and there was also a big screen TV in another room where we would take kids in for a group. And on the screen showed the two towers, and one of them had flames coming out and smoke, and one of the teachers in there said a plane hit the tower, and I thought they meant just like a small biplane or something. I didn't know it was a jet. So I went to my room and turned my students around because we were in study carols, and I taught kids that were about 18, 17 years old, and I felt like this is important for them to watch. So I had them all turn around and just told them, like, this is history in the making. Let's see what this is. And then we saw the second plane hit, and we knew that this was much more than an accident. And it was kind of like all the kids just stopped and turned to me and looked. And I was like, from this point on, we're a team, and we're going to watch this together.
And then also my dad just retired from New York State retirement system, and had he not retired, he had an office in the towers, so he would have been working that morning, but he had retired fortunately a couple months before, because typically every Tuesday he worked in New York City. So his replacement was there, and we knew him very well, and thankfully he got out basically unharmed. But being from New York, I just knew so many people that had family members that weren't as lucky, that didn't get out. And it's just a day that I just remember all of them, and I remember the feeling of panic and terror and just living a couple hours outside the city, and being to those towers numerous times, and then afterwards seeing what it looked like. My uncle worked at the Pentagon, and thankfully he wasn't there that day, but he knew people, of course, that weren't as lucky that were there. So for me, September 11th is just a day that I feel like it was yesterday, and I know it wasn't, but just being so close to the city and just the amount of people I knew who were personally affected by it. And thankfully, like I said, had my dad not retired, he would have been there that day.
Every generation has these defining events, and this was ours. A shock and a loss, depth of loss that I can't even begin to explain. There were videos of people jumping from the building. They were playing this on the news, showing it on the news. I went to class because I think I was still kind of in shock, and that was just the thing to do. I thought I needed to go to school. I walked into the building where my class was to be held. It was playing on every television there also. And the announcement got made that classes had been canceled indefinitely.
I was a junior in college at UT Knoxville and had an 8 o'clock class that morning, and got to class, and I lived on campus, so I walked to class. So I didn't have, I didn't listen to the radio or watch TV that morning. So when I got to class, everyone was watching what I thought was a movie, and everyone was definitely geared into what they were watching. And so I'd gotten there a little late, so I asked my classmate what we were doing, and she was like, "Oh, you haven't heard?" And basically began to tell me about the Twin Towers coming down. And as I was talking to her, the second tower had just come down as we were watching on TV, and it was just a very frantic time. Everyone who had family in New York or D.C. was calling home to make sure everyone's okay. It was just a moment of, or a time of just disbelief for days and days of what happened to our country.
September 11th, 2001. Where was I at during 9/11? I had just got out of volleyball practice my senior year in college, and I remember being in the dorm room, and I remember it going off on the news and them constantly replaying the towers falling. And it was very surreal because at that time, for us, for me, I've never witnessed anything happen on our soil. You've always known about, any sort of war taking place, and it was overseas, so you always felt safe. And being a senior in college, it was the first time you actually felt exposed. The first time you actually felt scared.
And all I remember is we didn't know who, we didn't know why, and everybody was just scared, and I just remember this feeling of like not knowing and being so scared of the unknown.
So I remember a lot of my teammates and a lot of people in the dorm rooms running down the hallway, screaming, "Turn on the news, turn on the news, turn on the news." Did you see what was going on? And it was about me and 4 of my teammates sitting in my dorm room, because back then I was one of the few people that had a TV, and it just kept replaying over and over again on every news station. I remember calling my mom to see if they were going to make her leave and travel out. I was in school in Georgia at the time, and my mom is a firefighter in the state of Nebraska. And they had asked if any firemen were willing to travel to New York and go and help. And at that time, my mom had just had my little sister, so she was unable to go. But they were shipping firemen out to New York. My brother at that time was actually in the military, and he had just got dishonorably discharged because he had severe asthma, and decided to go and help the Red Cross down in New York. And I remember him calling me a couple days later in full tears of awe of the situation. And you never really realize the impact of 9/11 if you're not really there. And I got to live 9/11 through my brother's eyes, which was kind of surreal in itself. But yeah, senior in college, watching the towers fall in my dorm room. It's kind of crazy.
What I remember about September 11, 2001 is that at that time I was actually working for the government, and I just happened to have a job that allowed me to be home during the day. And my son was in school, and I was watching my little nephew for a few hours. And my mom called me, and she said, "They're bombing us." And I remember turning on the TV. And that's important to me, and I had to give you that story because my mom was a child in London during World War II when the bombings went on. And I just remember being so terrified of our country going to war because I had heard all the stories that my mom told me about their country being in war.
I worked with a lady that was very wise, and she looked at me, and she's probably about 20 years older than me, and said, "This is how wars get started." And it didn't dawn on me till that moment that this is war, because you hear about Pearl Harbor and things that have happened to other people and during their lifespan, and this was just now happening to us.
And then they come in and said that the second building was hit, and I was like, no, we're probably going to war, because I knew after 2 something wasn't right, and that really bothered me.
And so after we did some research and went to CNN at the time, we realized that the second plane hit, we actually saw that one. And then the news commentators were saying this couldn't be a fluke, that it had to be something planned.
Most news stations had a live shot of the tower, the smoke coming out, and they were running this live shot. And I remember clearly. I don't remember everything clearly from that day, but I remember this. They were doing a recap like news agencies do, talking about the same thing over and over and over again, and I saw something in the distance. As he got closer, I realized it was another plane, and I witnessed the plane hit the second plane hit, and I just started screaming, it was another one, it was another one. My mom came over to see, and that's when it dawned it was not an accident. It was deliberate.
Purposefully into, oh my goodness.
Oh God.
There's another one. Oh my goodness, there's another one.
This seems to be on purpose.
Oh my goodness, now it's obvious, I think, that there's a second plane just crashed into the World Trade Center. I think we have a terrorist act of proportions that we cannot begin to imagine at this juncture.
The parents would stay in the city and the children would go up into the country. And I just couldn't imagine at that time being separated from my son or my sisters being separated from their children so that they wouldn't be hurt. I didn't know much about New York, but when I turned on the TV, that's when I saw the second plane hit. And it was just scared. I've never felt a fright like that before. I was scared for everybody. That's all I remember.
I remember very quickly, of course, cell phones, we had them, but texting was not a big deal. Thankfully, we still had landlines because all the cell phones jammed up. And we all started calling family. I let the kids use my phones to make sure everybody was okay. It was just very different. From that point, I had a younger brother who, after that, he was at Tennessee Tech and enlisted in the Army for infantry, so he went to war. He was in the invasion of Iraq that happened not too long after that. I remember going down I-40 to work and just seeing people had put flags in the middle of the median and seeing that the whole way to work, and just how the devastation just kept coming that day. I remember I was surprised whenever the president called for all planes to be grounded. I didn't even know that could be possible. But just seeing all that and the power that your president really does have, I think was surprising to me, because that was huge. And at the time, I had no idea how many planes were actually up in the air at one time.
I think one of the weirdest remembrance of all of that was actually when they stopped all the planes from flying over. They kept all the planes from flying anywhere. And so, like, you'd come out the next day and no planes would be flying over. It was a very, very surreal event to happen.
Seeing in real time about the Pentagon, hearing about the other plane in Pennsylvania, and just kind of putting yourself in that position of what they had to be so frightened, because they didn't know what was going on all around the world, and people just going about their normal day. And then watching them with the Twin Towers trying to get people out from the rubble, and not knowing how anybody could survive that once you see the devastation that happened. But that's what I remember about 9/11.
September 11th. I was in grad school at Middle Tennessee State University, and there was a young lady in class with me who was from New York, and all of a sudden she took off running out of class, and we thought, what in the world is going on? And then we all started hearing about how an airplane went into one of the towers.
So on September the 11th, 2001, I was working at my shop, and the TV was on in the waiting room, and one of the guys from up front came in and said, a plane just flew into the World Trade Center. And I said, oh my goodness, was it a big plane or a little plane? He said, they didn't know. So what I used before we had cell phones was this little pager that would text back and forth. I'm texting my wife back and forth. And it also had news and sports. I kept it with my Yankees. And all of a sudden I kept getting reports that the White House was hit. This was even before it was on the news. Then we started getting reports about the White House. Nobody hit the White House, but the Pentagon was hit. And then the one in the open field in Pennsylvania. We heard a lot of stories about it. The guys on the plane tried to stop it. And I think one of the last things they heard was someone said, let's roll. It was a very, very bad day. We were still working. A lot of people were still working. And seeing the towers on fire and then actually falling was probably the hardest, even after you knew they were hit. Seeing them actually fall was probably the hardest thing that I've ever seen in my life. It was just not a good day. It was very sad, and it was just a bad thing. Very bad thing.
On September 11th, 2001, I was in 3rd grade at Lakeview Elementary in Mount Juliet. From what I remember, I had, back in these days, you had these big, huge, ugly TVs in the corner of your room. They were brown, they were hideous. I'll never forget it. It's just a big block. And we're right in the middle of math, which was my favorite subject. That's the only reason why I remember. And another teacher literally ran into the room and whispered to my teacher. And you just see this look on her face of pure just, oh my gosh, like this is huge. So she stopped, everybody stopped. She turned on the TV for us. And you see, and I think these TVs I say black and white, but I'm not that old. You see just on replay on CNN the first plane crash. And a few minutes later, then we see the second plane crash. And then at this point, you've got 4 teachers in one classroom, and the adults are just sobbing. And you kind of sit there and you don't, at 8 years old, you don't really realize the severity of what's really going on. But to see 4 of your teachers who are your parents when you're away and, they're at work, and people that you admire and look up to see them crying freaked me out. I just will never forget that Miss Mitchell just sobbed. And I remember I got up and I went and hugged her because I didn't know the severity. I thought maybe it was an accident. You see something like that happen and you don't realize the pure, like, what it meant. So what ended up happening, they ended up, shutting down school that day. All your parents came to get you. I remember my mom and I, after she picked me up from school, which took her 3 hours to get to me, went to the gas station, which there were lines and lines and lines.
Being out of town, my parents called me frantically saying, fill out your car up with gas now, in case you have to get out and go somewhere. Well, all the gas stations were already empty. So we had a quarter of a tank of gas, and we're like, how far can we get? And we finally thought after a few hours just to stay put, hunker down, and listen to what the president's going to say, and take it from there.
Now, as an adult, growing up in that time where it happened, for the kids nowadays, not all of you were born yet. So for me, it's very important to discuss whether or not you were born, you were here on earth when it happened, or you weren't. 9/11 will be 17 years tomorrow or today. So it is very important for you guys to understand the severity of what it meant for us who grew up in it, but also what it means for y'all as a generation today. I will celebrate 9/11. In these 17 years, we have grown tremendously as a country. I remember, George W. Bush, he was our president at the time. I wrote a letter to him a year after the first anniversary of 9/11, and I actually still have that letter today that he wrote back. And he was just like, being 9 years old, write to the President of the United States, whether or not he actually said it or not, like wrote it himself, but somebody at the White House in it, and I had the seal, and it was really awesome. But just, it's really important for you guys to understand from, you know, from our aspect as adults, how much it affects us. So, yeah.
17 years ago, I was in the old Lebanon High School in my classroom. Coffee kids came down and asked me why I didn't have my TV on and watching New York City being blown up. I said, what? Nobody's blown up New York City. They said, they are down the hallway. You should turn on your TV, Mr. Crawley. I said, okay. So I turned it on and I watched the second plane go in. All I could say was my mouth fell open, couldn't believe it. I think the biggest thing that really stands out in my head is this. For about a week after 9/11, everybody in America was nice to each other.
But on a good note, I do remember that Sunday in church that every stranger, no matter what color, no matter what ethnicity, held hands and cried and prayed for the healing of our country.
We were nice to each other for about a week. I wish we could get that feeling back, but I think it had a lot to do with the shock we went through. But anyway, 17 years ago, it was shocking.
I was 9 years old when 9/11 happened. I was a fourth grader. And I remember very distinctly what seemed like a fairly normal day, going through, you know, fourth grader classes. And I was in the library, and I remember getting called to the office. My dad was there to pick me up, me and my sister both. And I thought that was very, very unusual, but, you know, as a fourth grader, you're excited to be out of school. So when I got into Dad's car, he told me and Anna Lee something had happened. He said that there had been a terrorist attack in New York. Needless to say, I was 9 years old. I didn't really know what that meant. And really, even though we went home, we watched the news, we got to see it unfold, the fact of the matter is it took me a very long time for the full extent of what had happened to dawn on me. Really, to this day, I'm still kind of learning about the ramifications of 9/11 in our history and for American culture in general.
So on September 11th, 2001, I was sitting in a burglary suppression class in Police Academy in Forsyth, Georgia, and sometime that morning, our instructor got a text, and he jokingly said, a plane hit the World Trade Center. We thought he was kidding, that he got a text from his wife and didn't want to tell us what it was. So he kept teaching, and he got a couple of more texts. One that said a plane hit the Pentagon, and another text that said a second plane hit the tower. And he canceled class. We walked outside, and there was a sea of hundreds of officers that were down there for training, scrambling to call home to find out if they needed to go back to active duty, calling their agencies to see what kind of protocols they were going to put into place. And everybody was sort of staring at the TV screen, just watching the images over and over and over. It was kind of surreal because that was one of my first policing memories. I wasn't even officially with my agency yet, and policing after that was totally different than what it was before because of those events. So it was sort of unreal to be a part of that.
It completely changed our world. Many of you don't know how because all you've grown up in is a post 9/11 world. A lot of things changed, and to this day, if I am dealing with you as a student and I happen to see your birthday, the first thing that I think of is how that birthday falls in relations to September the 11th of 2001, because the vast majority of you were born in 2001. That area still affects all of us today.
Hello, darkness, my old friend. I've come to talk with you again, because a vision softly creeping left its seeds while I was sleeping. was planted in my brain still remains within the sound of silence. In restless dreams I walked alone, narrow streets of cobblestone, neath the halo of a Hay Street lamp. I turned my collar to the cold and damp, when my eyes were stabbed by the flash of a neon light that split the night and touched the sound of silence. And in the naked light I saw 10,000 people, maybe more. People talking without speaking. People hearing without listening. People writing songs that voices never share. And no one dared disturb the sound of silence. Fool said I, you do not know. Silence like a cancer grows. Hear my words that I might teach you. Take my arms that I might reach you. But my words, like silent raindrops, fell and echoed in the wells of silence. And the people bowed and prayed to the neon god they made. And the sign flashed out its warning, and the words that it was forming. And the sign said the words on the prophets are written on the subway walls, in tenement halls, and whispered in the sound of silence.
We would like to thank our faculty and staff for sharing their stories on this tragic event and helping our generation understand the severity and helping us remember.
Any students who would like for their yearbook name to be different than Skyward must fill out a name change by September 14th. These forms can be picked up at room A303 and must be signed by a parent.
This Friday is makeup pictures for seniors and underclassmen and club pictures, so bring your smiling faces.
Anyone interested in joining Science Olympiad Club is meeting today at 245 room C105 at Ms. Otis.
There will be a Key Club interest meeting today after school in Ms. Chanel's room B309. Anyone interested in service or leadership is invited to attend.
There will be a video game club meeting in room B303 after school today.
Please bring your completed application form to the meeting if you have not submitted it to the bank. Extra forms can also be picked up at the bank today.
Crew for fall play will be posted outside the auditorium doors today.
Beta Club will be holding an interest meeting for anyone who is interested in joining the school year. The meeting will be tomorrow in Miss Carpenter's room B208. This meeting is required for anyone interested in becoming a member. If you cannot make the meeting, come talk to Miss Carpenter before next Wednesday.
The Humane Society will meet today after school at C200 in order to elect officers for the 2018-2019 school year.
counseling office is now on social media. Follow them on Facebook and Twitter at Lebanon Guidance.
Hey, listen up, because here's some important information about the ASVAB and PSAT test.
The ASVAB will be given on Thursday, September 27th. All sophomores, juniors, and seniors are eligible to take the test. The test is completely free and a great way to find out what careers may be a good fit after high school. All interested students must sign up in guidance by Wednesday, September 19th.
The PSAT is on October 24th. All sophomores and juniors are eligible to take the test. It's $16 and the deadline to sign up is today, September 11th. Sign up in guidance ASAP.
As many of you are aware, today is the 17th anniversary of September 11th, which is also referred to as 9/11. According to the History Channel, on September 11th, 2001, 19 militants associated with the Islamic extremist group Al-Qaeda hijacked 4 airplanes and carried out suicide attacks against targets in the United States.
2 of the planes were flown into the Twin Towers of the World Trade Center in New York City. A 3rd plane hit the Pentagon just outside of Washington, D.C., and the 4th plane crashed in a field in Pennsylvania. Almost 3,000 people were killed.
Thanks to the History Channel, we are able to inform you about this tragic day.
September 11th, 2001. A day of grief. A day of courage. This is how that day unfolded.
My daughter called me. She said, a plane just flew into the World Trade Center. I said, nah, you gotta be kidding. It's gotta be a Piper Cub or some clown was flying down the river.
At 8:46 a.m., American Airlines Flight 11 from Boston, with 92 aboard, traveling at a speed of 470 miles per hour, strikes the North Tower of the World Trade Center complex. Within minutes, officials coordinate the citywide emergency response. Their base of operations is a state-of-the-art command center located on the 23rd floor of 7 World Trade Center. With 1 tower in flames, the tragedy is only beginning. It is 9:03 when United Airlines Flight 175, with 65 aboard, traveling at the speed of 590 miles per hour, smashes into the South Tower of the World Trade Center. This aircraft strikes the corner of the South Tower. It rips a diagonally shaped gash from the 84th to the 78th floors. The South Tower lasts only 56 minutes before it succumbs at 9:59 a.m. The dust cloud billows outward for blocks. Victims stagger away. At 10:28, the television mast atop the North Tower spears straight down.
Once the collapse started, there really wasn't any way to stop it. It was just going to go all the way down once it got started.
Chaos in New York City. Power is down in Lower Manhattan. Phone lines jammed with more than 230 million calls. Hundreds of firefighters trapped in the towers. Hundreds more race to the scene. Falling debris from the collapse of the North and South Towers ignites fires in the neighboring buildings of the World Trade Center. World Trade 4, 5, and 6 are ablaze. World Trade 7, the building housing the city's command center, burns unchecked for 7 hours. At 5:20, it collapses. The city's emergency nerve center is destroyed.
Somewhere in that time, and it's very hard to keep track of time during this, they had been ordered to evacuate number 7 by the Port Authority. To this day, we don't know who gave that order, but whoever it was saved a lot of people's lives.
With New York a war zone, some residents walk across the Brooklyn Bridge to get out of the city. Others seek escape in vessels piloted by the Army Corps of Engineers. At 7:45 p.m., the New York Police Department says 78 officers are missing and estimates that 200 firefighters are dead. At 10:56 p.m., police officials say they believe there are victims alive in the rubble of the World Trade Center.
Working with urban search and rescue teams, there was a lot of areas to be searched underneath the debris field. There were voids that had to be searched for possible live people.
September 11th, 2001, the longest and most tragic day in New York's history, is drawing to a close.
One report said, and we can't confirm any of this, that a plane may have hit one of the two towers of the World Trade Center.
Oh my God.
That looks like a second plane.
Our belief at the moment is that an aircraft has crashed into the Pentagon.
By 9:34 a.m., it had become clear to air controllers that yet another plane had been hijacked. Then word started reaching the press.
Across the scanner in our newsroom was said that there was a flight that was missing. There had been a flight that they thought was heading towards Pittsburgh or Johnstown, which is where I was, and they couldn't get in touch with it.
They were talking about Flight 93. It had changed direction and was apparently now over Pennsylvania. All indications were that the plane was heading towards the nation's capital. But the hijackers had been careful to turn off the transponder, cutting all communication with air traffic control. From a plane near Cleveland, a call came into the GTE phone center. It was particularly alarming.
When I took over the call, there was a gentleman on the line, very soft-spoken, calm.
The soft-spoken gentleman was Todd Beamer, a passenger on United 93.
I asked him to explain to me in detail what is happening on the plane. He told me there were 3 people that was taking over the flight.
They tied red bandanas around their head, got up, and that was when they forced their way into the cabin.
But when the hijackers stormed the cockpit, nobody on Flight 93 was primed to stop them.
Prior to September 11th, the way flight attendants were trained on a plane was to listen to the hijackers, to stay calm, and to comply with what their demands were.
Unreleased recordings indicate a struggle in the cockpit.
Well, in the cockpit, I think that what happened is the pilots had been subdued. I think their necks have been slashed, and they're strapped in. They've got no way of defending themselves. You can't turn around and fight. They're just sitting ducks.
But it only got worse. From the hijackers, there was a horrifying announcement.
The hijackers on the intercom saying, "There's a bomb on board. We have control of this plane. We're going back to the airport."
On the airphone, Todd Beamer had informed operator Lisa Jefferson about the hijackers' tactics.
He told me that they've taken control of the plane. The plane is going down. At this point, he raised his voice. He said, "We're going down. We're going down. No, we're coming back up. Wait, we're turning around. We're going back north. I think we're going north." At this point, I don't know where we're going.
In fact, they had turned around and were now going east. At 9:35, it appeared that the hijackers were headed for Washington, D.C. But this was no ordinary hijacking. The attack on the World Trade Center would soon become known to the passengers on Flight 93, who called relatives.
And that's when they knew that this plane wasn't just being flown back to an airport. Once those people on board that plane knew it, they knew there was no going back. I mean, this was the new reality of what we face now, and they were the first ones that realized they needed to do something.
In the air above Pennsylvania, a plot was brewing.
Ty told me that him and a few other guys were thinking about jumping the guy with the bomb. He felt that he had to do to try to save the plane, and at least try to get the plane to land safely. And I told him that he had every hope, and I had hope for him that they could land the plane safely. He turned from me to speak to someone else, and he said, "Are you ready?" I couldn't hear their response. He said, "Okay, let's roll." That's the last I heard from Todd Beamer. The line was still open, but it was very silent. I didn't hear anything else. I kept that phone line open for about 15 additional minutes. And while our operations center was tracking the call, we heard that the plane had crashed in Pittsburgh. And I knew that was his flight. I felt that I had just lost a good friend.
A 35-foot deep pit in Pennsylvania became the grave of everybody on Flight 93.
People were drawn to Flight 93 because they felt those people on board were the first warriors in the battle against terrorism. And that's a theme you see in this temporary memorial over and over again in the messages people leave. Thank you for fighting back. Thank you for starting this fight against terrorists. I think people have thought that through and thought, would I do that? These people did something special.
Even though some of us were not born when 9/11 occurred, we hope you found this educational and will never forget.
Any FFA member who would like to order an official FFA official dress jacket should see an advisor ASAP. The cost is $65 and is due by September 14th. Additionally, any member who would like to be on the parliamentary procedure team should see Ms. Major this week.
GSA will have another meeting on today for anyone that was not able to come this week's meeting. It will be from 2:30 to 3 in Ms. Robertson's room, B213.
This year's homecoming theme is Rock the Raiders. Anyone interested in designing a t-shirt may submit a design to B213 by September 14th. The winning design will receive a free t-shirt.
Hey, we all like clothes, don't we? Well, I guess that's all for today, LHS. I'm Asia.
And I'm Lou.
And this has been News to You from the White and Blue.
1941, actually the next day that FDR said this day that shall live in infamy. We are living through another day of infamy for this country.
If tomorrow all the things were gone, I'd work for all my life, and I had to start again with just my children and my wife. Thank my lucky stars to be living here today, 'cause the flag still stands for freedom, and they can't take